There was a black hat hanging on the peg by my kitchen door that October morning, and it was not my husband's hat, and the whole time it hung there I could not make myself turn around from the stove. I was 22 years old and 3 years married, and behind me, at my own scrubbed table, the deacon had opened his book and laid his pencil down beside it, and the flour bin stood not 3 feet from his elbow. I kept my hands in the dishwater. There was coffee poured for him, and a plate of schnitz pie I had cut before he ever came up the lane, because that is what you do when the deacon comes. And my daughter was asleep in the next room, and outside the corn was cut, and the light was that thin October light that makes a kitchen look honest. I want you to understand, before I tell you any of the rest, that nobody in that room raised a voice. Nobody was cruel to me. Nobody searched my house or laid a hand on my person. I had hidden it badly, that is all. A coffee tin pushed in behind the flour, with 3 years of my own 2 hands inside it. And I stood at that stove and prayed the way you pray when you already know the answer. And then my husband said a kind thing across the table, and it was done. I should tell you how it started, because it did not start with the deacon, and it did not start with anybody doing a wrong thing. I married Aaron in November when I was 19, a widower from the next district over, and he was a good man then, and he is a good man now, and I want that said plainly before I say the rest of it. My first autumn in his house, I set a table at the end of our lane with eggs on it, brown eggs from my own hens, and a coffee can with a slot cut in the lid, because that is how it is done out here. The English slow their cars, and they take their eggs, and they leave their money in the can, and the honesty of it moved me every time. By the end of that first week, the can had $11 in it, and I carried it into the house against my apron like something alive. That Saturday, we drove the buggy into town for the mill, and I sat up beside my husband with the can in my lap, and when we stopped, I opened it and counted it out into his hand, and he put it in his coat pocket, and he thanked me, and he said nothing else, because there was nothing else that wanted saying. He did not take it from me. He did not ask me for it. I handed it to him. I want to be plain about that, because it is the whole of what I am telling you tonight. I handed it over the way you hand over a thing that was never yours, and I had watched my mother make that same motion at that same kind of table my whole life, her hand going out full and coming back empty, and it had never once looked strange to me, and it did not look strange to me then. I did not have a word for it yet. What I learned in the 2 years after that is the arithmetic of a woman with no money of her own, and it is a small arithmetic, and it wears on you the way a small stone wears on a shoe. If I wanted thread, I asked. If I wanted a stamp for a letter to my mother, I asked. There is nothing in the Ordnung about a wife asking her husband for a stamp, nothing anywhere in it, and still I learned to wait until after supper when he was easy, and to say it lightly, and to have a reason ready, and if you have ever rehearsed the words for a spool of thread, then you know exactly what I mean, and I expect you have never said it out loud either. The winter my daughter was born, I asked twice for shoes for her, and both times Aaron said we would see after the milk check came in, and he was not being hard with me, he was being careful, because the milk check is the milk check, and a farm is always 3 weeks behind itself. But I sat with her on my knee and her feet in my 2 hands, and something went quiet in me that I could not name. At church that Sunday, and we hold church in our homes here, our G-May going house to house through the year, I looked around that front room at the women in the benches, everyone in her cap, my mother's friends and my own age mates, and it came to me that any one of them could tell you the price of a bag of sugar to within 2 cents, and not one of them had 2 cents that answered to her. We are taught to keep our hands busy and our wants small. I finished my 8th grade at 14, and I learned that lesson better than I ever learned my sums. That spring I sold a quilt top to a shop in town for 38, and when I counted it out, I kept back 6, and I put the 6 in an empty coffee tin, and I set the tin behind the flour bin, and my heart beat so hard I had to sit down on the step and wait for it. I had no words yet for what was wrong in me. The tin was 3 years filling, and it never held very much. Egg money, quilt money, a little from the produce stand in the summer when the tomatoes came in heavy, and once a folded bill an Englishwoman pressed into my hand for a jar of chow chow because she said her grandmother used to make it just so. I knew what was inside that tin to the penny at all times, which tells you something, because I have never in my life known to the penny what was in the milk check. And I will tell you what it was for, because I have heard what people suppose. It was not for leaving. I never thought of leaving, not 1 hour, and I do not think of it now, and I would ask you not to hear this as that kind of story. It was for the doctor in town if my daughter spiked a fever on a Tuesday, and I did not want to have to ask first. We do not carry insurance out here, we carry each other, and we do not go running to doctors, but a mother wants to know she could. It was for the bus fare to my sister's, 4 counties over, if her time came hard. It was for one Christmas, where I gave a thing I had chosen, instead of a thing I had begged for. That is all it was. And I want you to know that for 3 years, I believed it was a sin. I said nothing of it to my husband, and nothing of it at council, and every time the deacon read out the giving, I sat with my hands in my lap and my face hot, sure that the smallness of me was written down somewhere in that book. And if you have sat with me this far, and if you have ever kept back something small that was yours, a little in a tin or a jar or the toe of a stocking, I would be grateful if you would subscribe, so you do not miss what the deacon's wife asked me that same evening, and gladder still if you would tell me in the comments whether you ever had a tin of your own, and whether you ever told a living soul about it. I read everyone. The 3rd autumn, the week after the last of the canning, the deacon came to us. You ought to know what a deacon is out here, because I think the English hear the word and picture something grand. Ours is the one they call the minister to the poor, and his work is money, the alms, what the district gathers and hands out again, a widow's roof, a family's hospital bill after a bad year, the fund that stands where insurance stands for other people. He is a farmer 6 days a week like anybody, and once a season he goes house to house with a plain ruled ledger under his arm and puts down what each household has and what each household can give. And there is nothing sinister in it, and I want to be fair to him. I had watched my own father sit at the other end of that table my whole childhood, only now it was my table. He hung his hat on my peg, and I poured the coffee and cut the pie, and he asked after the baby, and he said the corn had come in better than he had feared, and the bishop's name came up the way it does, and then he opened the ledger and wet his pencil and began. Aaron answered for us. That is the way it is done. The milk check, the colt that went to a neighbor in June, the lumber money, the seed still owed. My husband said it, and the deacon wrote it into his ruled columns, and the pencil made that small dry sound, and I stood at the stove with the dishwater going cold around my wrists and my back to the whole room. And then Aaron said, easy and kind, the way a man says a thing he has never once turned over in his mind. There is a bit more in the kitchen. Sadie keeps a little from her eggs. I want you to hear that he was not accusing me of anything. He was being honest with the deacon, which is what a man is supposed to be, and he had known about that tin all along, of course he had, and he had never in his life thought it was anything but ours. That was the whole trouble, and not one person in that kitchen could see it, and I could not see it either. I dried my hands on my apron. I went to the flour bin and I took out my own tin and I set it on my own table with my own hand. 81 and some change. He counted it and he wrote it into the household column, and he did not ask me one single question, and I did not ask him one either, and the pencil went on down the page. That evening I had a quart jar of Barbara's to carry back, the one she had sent soup in when the baby was small, and I walked the half-mile up the road with it in the dark because I could not sit still in my own house. Barbara is the deacon's wife. She is 60-some years old, small, with hands like a man's from 40 years of gardens, and she was alone at her table when I came in, with the lamp turned low and a book lying open in front of her. It was not the book her husband carries. This one was older, soft-backed, the corners gone round and furry with handling. She looked at my face and she did not ask me what was wrong. She put me in a chair and poured me coffee I did not want, and she let me sit there until I had said the whole of it, the tin, the flour bin, the pencil, the column. And when I had finished, I said the thing I had walked up there to say, which was that I was ashamed of myself, and that I supposed it had never truly been mine to keep. Barbara set down her cup. She looked at me a long moment, and then she asked me the question I have carried every day since. "Child," she said, "who told you it wasn't yours?" I opened my mouth to answer her, and I want you to understand that I could not. I went back through all of it while she waited. Back through 3 years and the tin and the stand and the coffee can at the end of the lane, and further back than that, back to my mother's hand going out full and coming back empty at a table in another district when I was 7 years old, and there was nobody there. Not the bishop, not the ordnung, which does not say one word about a wife's egg money and never has, and I have looked. Not my husband, who had never in his life been asked that question either. Nobody had ever told me. Not earlier, not later, not once. It had simply been the water I was raised in, and nobody standing in the water tells you that it is water. Then she turned the old book around on the table and pushed it across to me. Ruled lines, and women's hands, 40 years of them. "It is the sister's ledger," she said, "and there is no man's column above it, and it is not a secret and it is not against anybody, it is only ours. Money the women of this district earned and kept and lent to one another for their own needs, a stove, a doctor, a girl's train fare home to her mother, and every bit of it given back in its time and written down plain." I sat there turning the pages and reading the names. "Liu," she said, "the way the old women say it to you in Pennsylvania Dutch when they mean to hold you still. All those names, women I have passed the bread to my whole life." And then Barbara reached over and put her finger halfway down a page from 20 years back, and I saw my own mother's hand. My mother's name, and a number beside it, and a second number where it came back. She had a tin, too. She had a tin the whole time, and she wrote in this ledger, and she sat in my kitchen at my own wedding, and in 19 years she never once told me that I was allowed one. Nothing loud happened after that. I want to be honest with you, because I know the way these stories usually go when people tell them. I walked home, and I did not wake my husband, and in the morning I took the tin out from behind the flour and set it on the shelf beside the salt where anybody at all could see it, and then I was frightened of that shelf for a solid week. Aaron noticed it on the 3rd day. He asked what it was doing there, and I told him plainly, in a way I had never told him anything, that it was my egg money, and that I meant to keep it, and that I had been keeping it, and that I was sorry for the hiding, but not one bit sorry for the keeping. He did not get angry with me. He got embarrassed, which was worse, and which was also better. He stood there in his stocking feet and went red up the back of his neck and said he had never thought about it, not one time in 3 years, and I said I know, and that was the truest talking we had ever done. He did not make a speech, and neither did I. But that Saturday, when we came back from the stand, he set the money on the table instead of putting it in his coat, and he said nothing about it, and he has done it that way ever since, and it took him about a month to stop doing it so carefully. I wrote my first line in the sister's ledger that November, in my own hand, on a fresh page, 4 pages on from my mother's. And the following spring there was a bride 2 farms over, 19 years old, married at the same age I was married, and her mother is dead, and her people are 3 counties away, and she needed a thing she could not bring herself to ask her husband for, and I lent it to her out of my tin, and it came back at threshing, and it was written down, and I did not tell my husband, and I did not need to. That is the part I never expected. Not the freedom of it, the being able to give. If you are a wife listening to me, or a mother, or a woman of any kind who has been keeping something small in a tin or a stocking or the bottom of a sewing basket, I would like to say a few things to you gently, because I am not bitter, and this was never a complaint. Money of your own was never rebellion. It was never pride either, whatever you were taught, and I was taught it the same as you were. Here is the part that nobody counted. A woman with nothing of her own has no way to be generous. She cannot help her sister. She cannot ease a neighbor. She can only ask and be given and be thankful, and that is a fine thing to be some of the time, and a hard thing to be all of the time. I do not blame my husband. He was handed a way of doing things, and he did it. And when he was told plainly, he changed, and there are not many men anywhere of whom you can say that. I do not blame the deacon, who came to my table doing an ordained and unglamorous duty with a plain pencil, and who has kept widows in firewood for 30 years. I do not blame my people, or my district, or the faith I was raised in and hold to yet, and I would ask you not to blame them either. There is no villain in this. There is only an arrangement that every one of us inherited, handed down hand to hand like a recipe nobody ever read out loud, and the real harm in it was never that somebody took a thing from me. It is that in all those years not one person thought to ask me the question, and that I had never once thought to ask it of myself. Honor your mothers who kept their tins in silence and never got to say so. Mine did. She is gone now, and I found her name in a ledger 20 years too late, and I am still learning to forgive her for keeping it from me and to understand exactly why she did. For 3 years, I could not have told you what was wrong. I have a word for it now. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I wrote it all down, everything an Amish wife is never able to say out loud in her own district, the tin and the pencil and the names in the sister's ledger, and I called the book A Quiet and Faithful Home, and the full story is in the pinned comment below, the very first one, if it should ever be a comfort to you. Until next time, keep something of your own, and be gentle with the ones who were never told they were allowed to, and God bless you and yours.